on this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the Maritime Blockade of Ukraine. I'm your host, Sal Mercaglano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. If you're new to the channel, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So I got asked to do this, and so I wanted to go ahead and get it out there. A few months ago, John Conrad over at G Captain wrote a really interesting piece where he asked the question, basically, is the maritime blockade of Ukraine working? And I thought it'd be a good idea a month or so later to take a look at it and ask that same question again. So this is John's original piece back in March 7th, where he talks about the maritime blockade. And one of the things he talks about is really whether or not they're being successful. He says here, in the early days of the war, the rapid intermodal supply of materials via roads, rail, and airports is important for winning battles. In today's war, Russia's military forces are struggling to handle land and air logistics, but that may not matter in the long run because winning early battles doesn't translate into long-term success. To win a war, you need massive logistics. You need a constant flow of heavy supplies like food, ammunition, and fuel. To move large amounts of heavy material, you need ships. You need the 4th Armored Defense. You need sea lift. And I agree entirely with John on that. One of the things I think that Russia had hoped to be able to do out of this war, and what they still may be doing, is trying to strangle Ukraine off from the outside, but more importantly, use their naval assets to support their land campaign. But if we've seen recently, the Russian use of their naval assets has not gone particularly well. If you look over here at marine traffic, they have done a great job in basically blocking out the Gulf of Odessa. We know here off Snake Island, basically this island right here is Zemeny Island. They were part of the instrumental capture of that island early in the campaign. Really important to grab that island to control the flow of goods heading up into the port of Odessa. And we know Russian ships have been patrolling off the coast. We know this is where they lost their cruiser, the Moskva. But we also know that the Russians are still able to prevent the flow of goods in and out of Ukrainian ports. As a matter of fact, zoom in here in the port of Odessa. What you see is the ships that were there at the beginning of the war still sitting there. The Riva Wind, a bulker out of the Marshall Islands, Polar Star out of Liberia, the Joseph Schultz, a large container ship for Costco out of Hong Kong, all sitting there. And they've been able to deny that access of the Gulf of Odessa. In the Sea of Azov, we all hear about the Mariupol and the holdout there in Mariupol. But what you don't see in here, because they're not showing it on their AAS transponders, is since Mariupol has largely been shut off, and more importantly, they have cut off the artillery and long-range rocket fire, they've been able to move vessels off Rostov-on-the-Don through the Kerch Strait, and they're convoying vessels through the Sea of Azov. Right now, Russian naval vessels are providing that protection as vessels come down the Volga River through the Caspian Sea, connecting over to the canal, and then once out here, a major tributary. The Russians needed the Sea of Azov to be able to move their goods, and then they're still running cargo here out of Novorossiysk, large terminal here for both petroleum and grain, hooked up to a pipeline over to the Caspian Sea and then over to Central Asia. That's where it stands right now. But let's take a look at how Russia has progressed here. So, of course, there's the story of the Russian Alligator-class landing ship that got hit by a missile. I did a whole video on this that you can take a look at. It was destroyed at the port of Berdiansk. They were using the port of Berdiansk on the Sea of Azov as a logistics base. Their Alligator-class LSTs were being used to offload their other ships, the Rapuchas, and the Ukrainians, it seems, targeted that vessel, able to hit it with weapons from a drone and destroy it and sink it right along the berth. We've seen the satellite imageries of that. Then you, of course, come to their biggest success here, the sinking of the cruiser Moskva that you see here in a little bit more detail. If you really want a great detailed breakdown of this, John Conrad did it in a tweet, which I'll link over into the show notes. One of the things that he looks at, from a commercial, John is a commercial captain, is how we would look at this as commercial people looking at this. Understand, ship got hit by 2 Ukrainian Neptune missiles, basically a derivation of our Harpoon missile. The U.S. had a similar experience in the Persian Gulf in the 1980s. This is the frigate USS Stark in 1987, hit by 2 French Exocet sea skimming missiles, very similar to the Harpoon. These were launched by an Iraqi aircraft. 2 of them went into Stark, 1 under the bridge and 1 amidships. The warheads didn't explode on these. Instead, you had massive fires from the fuel on board, but nearly sank the vessel. In the case of the Moskva, not so successful. One of the things we see is really the difference between Russian and American damage control. One of the things we know is the vessel here still afloat, still has reserve buoyancy, as you can see. But one of the evidences you see here is the vessel has been abandoned. There's no life rafts anywhere on here. The life rafts have been ejected. The life boats, the launches are up. That's what that crane is there for, to launch the boats. Looks like it took 2 missile hits right there low on the waterline. Fires burning amidships. That's over the engine plant. You can see the 2 side-by-side stacks there. Smoke coming out of the portholes, these blackened areas here. This vessel had portholes, doesn't have air conditioning, so they use the portholes for ventilation in the ship. Probably fire ran the entire length of the vessel. Flooding obviously caused by the holes being below the waterline at this point. There's a salvage tug off the starboard side of the vessel. You can see it shooting water up here. And what eventually happens is they realize they couldn't save the ships. Either the fires were out of control, gutting the vessel, or the flooding couldn't be stopped, and the vessel had to be abandoned. Russians, unlike Americans, don't train every one of their sailors to be firefighters and damage control personnel. The U.S. does. And you can see the difference between the Stark's salvage in 1987 versus Moskva's in 2022. However, we're going to be careful about this because the U.S. did lose a helicopter carrier in port in the Bonhomme Richard due to a fire. The loss of Moskva, the loss of the Alligator class landing ship, and really the kind of mixed bag so far in the war at sea raises some questions. Are the Russians being successful? They have shut off trade to Ukraine. The Gulf of Odessa is empty of vessels. The Russians had taken over a Estonian vessel, the Helt, to use it as kind of a surveillance vessel, but it supposedly ran into a mine or a minefield and was sunk. We know they're convoying ships across the Sea of Azov, but what are the professionals saying about it? And this is what I always like is who's writing about this and who's saying things about this. So first piece I want to mention to you is this one over in Foreign Policy by Admiral Jamie Fogo. Admiral Fogo is now the Dean of the Center for Maritime Strategies for the U.S. Navy League. And back in March, he wrote this: the West didn't do enough. Ukraine faces a fight on its beaches. Ukraine is outgunned on the Black Sea as Russia invasion turns amphibious. And he really identified a lot of the issues that Ukraine was going to face. Being outnumbered, being outgunned. Admiral Fogo, I think, hits it exactly on the mark with this. Obviously, he couldn't envision the issues Russia would be having, losing a support ship in Berdiansk, losing the Moskva, but really identifies a lot of the key issues. Add to it this article just out on Bloomberg by Admiral James Stavridis. Russia's sunken warship is a warning to all navies. The sinking of the Russian Black Sea flagship Moskva on April 14th was the first destruction of a major warship in combat since the Falkland Wars 40 years ago, when the Belgrano was lost to the HMS Conqueror, and obviously the British losses to the Argentinians, including Sheffield, Coventry, and Atlantic Conveyor, and others. Go ahead here. For the Russians, you would have to go back to World War II to find a comparable loss. How will this dramatic event affect the war in Ukraine, and what are the lessons for navies worldwide? And Admiral Stavridis goes into some great detail here. The link is in here to John's post. I'll just come down here to the end to his conclusion. Finally, the sinking will have an effect on global operations of all navies. It's a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities of surface ships. to relatively low-cost, numerous, and technologically advanced cruise missiles. As the Ukrainians have demonstrated by striking tanks, armored personnel carriers, and helicopters ashore, the cost benefits of a cruise missile kill is very high for the attacking force. Jump ahead here. The desk of Moskva is a vivid reminder of the need for a capable anti-air weapon system, well-honed damage control, and tactical choices when operating near hostile coasts. Even as Russia seeks to learn the lessons of the sinking of its Black Sea flagship, the U.S. and its powerful allies need to do as well. I think Admiral Stavridis is sounding a very good warning for what we need to go ahead. I want to add just a couple of more here to it. So the Center for International Maritime Security, CIMSEC, which I'm a member of and a partner with, just the other week concluded Russia-Ukraine week. And what they have here is a series of articles. Dmitry Philip is one of the editors, and Dmitry was able to put together 4 authors who answered the call for articles here. CIMSEC is great, open to everybody, no charge, but they do ask for donations if you can help support them. They run a great podcast. If you're interested in this topic, I strongly recommend the Sea Control podcast. I think it's great. So first one here, Reconsidering Russian Maritime Warfare. This is Michael Peterson's. How might Russia's maritime forces be brought to bear against the United States and its allies? The question is particularly critical as fears of inadvertent escalation in Ukraine increases. Understanding the answer requires a close reading of what Russian military theorists themselves write about warfare, matched with an examination of maritime geography. So he talks about the Russian Federation's Navy's wartime tasks. What are they basically tasked to do? And he identifies them from the Ministry of Defense list right here. Rapid mobilization, transition to wartime footing as part of a strategic deterrence mission, isolation of local conflicts and preventing them from growing into a regional war, and protection of Russian economic interests and freedom of navigation at sea. He talks about the tyranny of geography. Russia is burdened with a geography that does not make its naval forces mutually supporting. Talks about an over-the-horizon capability that needs to be developed by all sides. He reimagines or imagining Russian warfare at sea. And then finally here, the implications for analysis and planning. And again, I think it's really important that you get this kind of broad overview of what is Russian strategy. Next one, which I think is one of the best, is Jason Lancaster's An Anti-Access Denial Strategy for Ukraine. Basically sets the blueprint for what what Ukraine did regarding the Moskva and what they can use, and particularly the use of sea mines. Sea mines are particularly important. He's got this great quote, "We have lost command of the sea to a nation without a navy, using weapons that were obsolete in World War I and laid by vessels that were used at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ." That's Rear Admiral Smith, the commander of the Amphibious Task Force at Wonsan, Korea in 1950, referring to the North Koreans laying World War I era Russian mines off of junks. And the enemy always has a vote in how a war is persecuted. Talks about coastal defense cruise missiles, which the Ukraine Neptune comes into that, scouting assets, the use of the TB2 drone that we saw. And then he kind of concludes here with his envisionment. Lieutenant Commander Lancaster is spot on in his analysis. And this one by Jay Overton for Ukraine, the 1,000 ship Navy finally set sail. As of mid-March 2022, the nation of Ukraine, invaded and partially occupied, effectively has no Navy. On March 3rd, Ukraine scuttled its Navy flagship to prevent the vessel's capture by invading Russian forces. Recent losses aside, the two nations' naval forces were unevenly matched before the current war. And he cites the article by Admiral Fogo. Goes on, being without a Navy, fortunately, does not mean there is no sea power acting in the Ukraine's interest, or there are no naval lessons or innovations coming from this terrible and hopefully short conflict. From Maine to Majorca, Turkey to Panama, a distributed network of international maritime actors has emerged in response to Russian aggression. It manifests a theory that was developed 17 years ago, the 1,000 ship Navy. This was Admiral Mike Mullen, who had been chief of naval operations, came up with this idea. And particularly, he's talking about the identification and tracking down of, in this case, Russian yachts, and how they've been tracked, isolated, and really forced to flee. But the idea of using multiple assets and commercial assets are really important. Finally, the last article, Russian Naval Strategy for the Indo-Pacific, is by David Scott. Again, he's talking about how Russians' naval forces will be used, not just in Ukraine, but in the Indo-Pacific region, with the shifting of forces from the Pacific over to the region. While the Moskva has been sunk, there are still 2 Slava-class cruisers in the Mediterranean, along with a sizable Russian naval presence. So he talks about, again, Russian doctrine, which establishes their basing facilities or lack thereof, their assets they have. It's really a good overview of the Russian Navy, this article, if you want this good kind of overview. And then talks about deployments and relationships the Russians have developed. All of these are really great articles, but the pinnacle article, the one I really want you to take a look at, is this one by B.J. Armstrong, Commander, U.S. Navy, over at the Naval Academy. I think this is a great one. And he's looking at the Russian-Ukraine war, retrospect and prospect. BJ's got this great idea of what he calls the 3 Bs of naval strategy: blockade, bombardment, and putting boots on the ground. And he really kind of pulls it together here in how this has been playing out in the Black Sea between Russia and Ukraine. And a really detailed analysis. This is over at War on the Rocks, which is another site that really allows a lot of serving naval officers and people interested in the field to get out there and write about it. And again, I think BJ has really kind of captured this. He notes this on naval warfare in the Black Sea. In the first phase of the Russian war in Ukraine, the Russian Navy largely succeeded in the basics of establishing a coherent naval strategy. It quickly established command of the sea by keeping Ukrainian ships from sailing. Once control of the waters of the southern coast of Ukraine and the Sea of Azov was established, the Russians began using it for military purposes by blockading the coast, launching naval bombardment of targets both on the coast and well inland. They're using their Caliber cruise missiles for that, and by landing boots on the ground with amphibious reinforcements of existing operations. They're not storming ashore against opposed beaches, they're reinforcing. Attempts to resupply Russian forces via the sea has been a mixed bag, with some success and some spectacular failures, the ship at Berdiansk. But the war on shore has entered a second phase. As Ukraine begins amassing more sophisticated, capable weapons, Russian forces face limitations due to the limited Turkish closure of the Bosphorus under the terms of the Montreux Convention. They enacted Article 29 of the Montreux Convention, which means only ships that are home ported in the Black Sea for Russia, Ukraine can sail through the straits. And then finally, he says the war at sea can shift as well. Great piece, just a fantastic piece that BJ did. Really heartily recommended. And of course, all these pieces will be in the show notes, paragraph identifying this YouTube video. So lastly, one last aspect of whether or not the blockade is working. This announcement came out today from the Biden administration. Biden bans Russian ships from U.S. ports. Sounds great. Sounds fantastic. Why it hasn't been done yet, don't know, but okay, we just did this. This is the Reuters report. President Joe Biden announced on Thursday the United States will, future tense, Russian-affiliated ships from American ports joining Canadian and European nations in the latest step to pressure Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. Great, we're going to stop Russian ships from coming in. August 21 story, fantastic. I should mention this story. This is an April 20th story. I'm sorry, the other story was April 21st. This is April 22nd story. So here's the April 20 story. U.S. refiners receiving last Russian oil cargoes before sanctions wind down. 9 tankers carrying Russian origin crude and fuel oil have been discharging in the United States in April, likely the last ones to deliver before a wind down set by Washington expires this week. Customs and tanker track data shows. The United States last month set an April 22 ban on imports of Russian crude and refined products. The United States gave importers of Russian petroleum, liquefied natural gas, and coal 45 days to take en route and under contract cargo. So sounds great that the Biden administration is doing this, but that blockade against Russian ships was announced quite a while ago and is only starting to take effect now. I hope you appreciate the analysis. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. I'm looking forward to a discussion on this. This is a great topic for us to study. Obviously, my thoughts and prayers go with everybody involved in war. It's not a laughing matter by any means. However, I think it's really important that we pay attention to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, its implications in the global supply chain, and how it can affect us directly going forward. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. And if you can, support us via our Patreon page. Until our next video, this is Sal signing off.